Imagine discovering an ancient book so mysterious that for centuries many people believed it revealed secrets about heaven, angels, and the early world that most believers had never heard before. A book once read by early followers of the faith, quoted in the New Testament, yet later left outside the official collection of Scripture. A book that speaks of powerful heavenly beings. A man who walked so closely with God that he did not experience death, and visions that described the order of the cosmos and the destiny of humanity. This is the story of the Book of Enoch. For many people, the name Enoch appears only briefly in the Bible. In the book of Genesis, his story is surprisingly short. We are told that Enoch lived for many years, walked faithfully with God, and then something extraordinary happened. Instead of the usual ending written about every other person in that ancient genealogy, the text says something remarkable. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him. That single line has sparked centuries of curiosity. What does it mean that God took Enoch? Where did he go? And why did this mysterious man become the center of one of the most intriguing ancient writings ever discovered? The Book of Enoch, sometimes called 1 Enoch, claims to preserve visions and revelations connected to this ancient figure. Within its pages are stories about heavenly messengers, cosmic mysteries, and warnings about the future of the world. For many readers, the book feels almost like stepping into a hidden chapter of early biblical history. But here is where the mystery deepens. Despite its fascinating content, the Book of Enoch is not included in most modern Bibles. It is absent from the standard biblical canon used by most Christian traditions. Yet fragments of the text were discovered among the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, proving that the book was known and valued by some ancient communities. Even more surprising, a passage from the Book of Enoch appears to be quoted directly in the New Testament, in the letter of Jude. This raises an important question. If early believers knew about the Book of Enoch, and if parts of it were preserved in ancient manuscripts, why did it eventually disappear from most biblical collections? Was it misunderstood? Was it considered too mysterious? Or was it simply part of a larger collection of writings that helped early readers reflect on the spiritual world? The answers to these questions take us on a fascinating journey through history. To understand the Book of Enoch, we must travel back thousands of years into a world where people believed that heaven and earth were closely connected, where visions and dreams were seen as ways God could reveal truth, and where storytellers preserved powerful traditions about the earliest generations of humanity. In this world, Enoch was remembered as a man who lived in extraordinary closeness with God. While many other figures in early biblical genealogies are simply listed by name, Enoch stands out. His life is described with a sense of wonder and reverence. According to the biblical account, Enoch lived during a time long before the great flood described in the story of Noah. He belonged to the early generations of humanity, when the world was still young and filled with mystery. The Book of Enoch builds upon this brief biblical mention and expands it into a series of dramatic visions. These writings describe Enoch as a man who receives revelations about heaven, the order of creation, and the moral choices that shape the destiny of humanity. Some sections portray journeys through the heavens. Others speak about the movements of the sun and stars. Still others contain warnings about justice, righteousness, and the consequences of human actions. For ancient readers, these stories were not merely entertainment. They were meant to inspire reflection about faith, obedience, and the nature of God's rule over the world. In many ways, the Book of Enoch belongs to a type of literature that scholars call apocalyptic writing. This style of writing often uses vivid imagery and symbolic visions to explore deep spiritual truths. It speaks about hidden realities behind the visible world and encourages readers to remain faithful even when life feels uncertain. Books like the biblical Book of Daniel and the Book of Revelation share similar themes. But the Book of Enoch has its own unique voice. It presents Enoch as a witness to heavenly mysteries, someone who has shown how the universe is ordered and how divine justice ultimately prevails. For many modern readers, encountering this book can feel like opening a forgotten door into the imagination of ancient believers. Yet it is important to remember that the Book of Enoch was written over time by different authors who lived centuries after the historical Enoch himself. The book does not claim to be a simple biography. Instead, it is a collection of writings that use Enoch's name as a symbol of wisdom and spiritual insight. In the ancient world, it was common for authors to write in the voice of a respected figure from the past. This was not meant as deception, but as a literary way of connecting new teachings to revered traditions. Understanding this helps us appreciate the Book of Enoch as part of the rich spiritual conversation that shaped early Jewish and Christian thought. But the most fascinating parts of the story are still ahead. How did these writings first appear? Who preserved them through the centuries? And what exactly do they say about the spiritual world that captured the imagination of so many readers? In the next part of our journey, we will step deeper into history to explore how the Book of Enoch was written, how it survived through ancient manuscripts, and why it became one of the most discussed texts outside the Bible. Because the story of the Book of Enoch is not only about one mysterious ancient book, it is also about how generations of believers searched for meaning, asked questions about the unseen world, and tried to understand the relationship between heaven and earth. And as we will soon discover, the path of this extraordinary text is just as intriguing as the visions it contains. If you are ready to continue exploring this hidden chapter of biblical history, just say, to truly understand the Book of Enoch, we must first step back into the world where this mysterious text first appeared. A world very different from our own. A world where people believed that the boundaries between heaven and earth were closer than we often imagine today. The story begins with a figure mentioned briefly in the early chapters of Genesis, a man named Enoch. In the genealogy found in Genesis chapter 5, many generations are listed between Adam and Noah. Most of these names are followed by a simple pattern. A person lived for many years, had children, and eventually died. But when the story reaches Enoch, something unusual happens. Instead of ending with the words, "and he died," the text says something remarkable. Enoch walked faithfully with God, then he was no more, because God took him. This short statement has fascinated readers for thousands of years. It suggests that Enoch's relationship with God was so close that his life ended in a way different from everyone else. Ancient readers saw this as a sign that Enoch was a man of great spiritual insight. Over time, stories began to grow around his name. People imagined that someone who walked so closely with God must have received extraordinary wisdom about the world, heaven, and the mysteries of creation. These ideas eventually inspired the writings that would later be known as the Book of Enoch. However, it is important to understand that the Book of Enoch was not written during the time when the biblical Enoch lived. Scholars believe the book was written much later, between 300 BC and 100 BC, during a period known as the Second Temple era of Jewish history. This was a time of intense spiritual reflection for many Jewish communities. The people of that era were asking big questions. Why does injustice sometimes seem to succeed in the world? Why do the righteous sometimes suffer? How will God ultimately restore justice? Writers began exploring these questions through powerful symbolic stories and visionary experiences. This type of literature became known as apocalyptic writing, a style that reveals hidden truths about the spiritual world and the future of humanity. The Book of Enoch belongs to this tradition. Rather than presenting simple historical events, it uses visions, symbolic journeys, and heavenly revelations to explore the nature of good and evil. One of the reasons the book gained attention among ancient readers was because it expanded on mysterious ideas hinted at in the Bible itself. For example, in Genesis chapter 6, there is a short and puzzling passage that describes the sons of God and the Nephilim, often translated as giants. The text is brief and does not provide many details, but the Book of Enoch offers a much longer explanation, describing heavenly beings who descended to earth and influenced the early generations of humanity. For readers in the ancient world, these stories were not just dramatic tales. They were attempts to explain why the world seemed filled with both beauty and corruption. By telling these stories through the voice of Enoch, the authors connected their reflections to the wisdom of a figure who was already respected in biblical tradition. As the writings developed, they were gathered into several sections that together formed what we now call 1 Enoch. These sections include the Book of the Watchers, which describes heavenly beings and their influence on the earth; the Book of Parables, which presents visions about divine justice and the future; the Astronomical Book, which explores the movements of the sun, moon, and stars; the Dream Visions, which contain symbolic dreams about the history of humanity; and the Epistle of Enoch, which offers teachings about righteousness and faithfulness. Each of these parts reflects the spiritual concerns of ancient communities trying to understand the world around them. But how do we know these writings actually existed in ancient times? The answer comes from one of the most important archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls. In 1947, a group of ancient manuscripts was discovered in caves near the Dead Sea. These scrolls included copies of many biblical books, along with other religious writings that were valued by the Jewish community that lived in that region. Among these manuscripts were fragments of the Book of Enoch. This discovery confirmed that the book was known and read by some Jewish groups more than 2,000 years ago. For historians, this was a remarkable confirmation of the book's ancient origins. However, the story of how the Book of Enoch survived through history is even more fascinating. For centuries, the complete text of the book seemed to disappear from most parts of the world. While fragments existed in ancient languages such as Aramaic and Greek, the only complete version that survived was preserved in the Ethiopian Christian tradition. In Ethiopia, the Book of Enoch remained part of the biblical canon used by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. For believers in that tradition, the book was never lost or forgotten. But in most other parts of the world, the text slowly faded from common use. By the time the biblical canon was formally recognized by many Christian communities, the Book of Enoch was no longer widely circulated. As a result, it was not included in most standard collections of Scripture. Yet, its influence did not disappear completely. As mentioned earlier, a passage from the Book of Enoch appears to be quoted in the New Testament letter of Jude. This connection shows that early followers of the faith were at least familiar with some of the ideas found in the book. All of this raises a fascinating question. What exactly did these ancient writers believe Enoch saw during his visions? What kind of heavenly journeys did they describe? And why did the stories of mysterious beings and cosmic secrets capture the imagination of so many ancient readers? To answer these questions, we must explore one of the most dramatic sections of the book, the story of the Watchers, powerful heavenly beings whose actions were believed to have changed the course of human history. Their story forms the heart of the Book of Enoch. And in the next part of our journey, we will step into that ancient narrative to discover why these mysterious figures became one of the most talked about elements of this remarkable text. If you are ready to continue the story, as the story of the Book of Enoch unfolds, we arrive at one of its most dramatic and mysterious sections, an account often called the Book of the Watchers. For many readers, this part of the text feels like stepping into an ancient world filled with powerful spiritual forces, hidden knowledge, and a struggle between righteousness and corruption. According to the narrative, the early generations of humanity were not alone in shaping the destiny of the world. The story begins with a group of heavenly beings known as the Watchers. These Watchers were described as guardians or observers placed in the heavenly realm. Their role, according to the story, was to watch over creation and maintain order in the world. But the narrative suggests that something unexpected happened. Some of these Watchers began to look upon the earth with curiosity and desire. Instead of remaining within the order established for them, they chose to descend to the human world. In the Book of Enoch, this decision becomes a turning point in the story of humanity. The text describes how a leader among these beings gathered others together and convinced them to join in this act. Together they made a solemn agreement that they would descend to earth and interact with human society. For ancient readers, this moment symbolized the beginning of a deep disruption in the harmony of creation. Once these watchers arrived on earth, the book describes how they shared knowledge with humanity, knowledge that had previously been hidden. Some passages speak about teachings related to craftsmanship, the use of metals and other forms of technical skill. Other passages describe knowledge connected to the movement of the stars and the patterns of the heavens. To modern readers, these descriptions may sound symbolic. Ancient writers often used stories like this to reflect on how powerful knowledge could shape civilization for good or for harm. But the Book of Enoch suggests that the influence of the Watchers eventually contributed to the spread of corruption and injustice in the world. As human societies grew more complex, the narrative describes a world that became filled with violence, pride, and moral confusion. According to the story, the consequences of these actions did not go unnoticed. The text describes how the cries of humanity rose up to heaven. In response, divine messengers were sent to observe what was happening on earth. Among these heavenly figures were names that appear elsewhere in biblical tradition: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. In the Book of Enoch, these messengers witness the growing disorder in the world and bring a report before God. What they describe is a world that has drifted far from the path of righteousness. This moment becomes one of the key turning points in the narrative. God declares that the corruption spreading across the earth cannot continue forever. Judgment, according to the story, will come not as an act of cruelty, but as a restoration of justice and balance. Within this context, Enoch himself enters the story in a powerful way. Unlike the Watchers, who are portrayed as stepping beyond their proper place, Enoch is presented as a faithful servant of God. Because of his righteousness, he is chosen to act as a messenger. The book describes how Enoch receives visions that reveal the hidden structure of the universe. In these visions, he journeys through different realms of creation, guided by heavenly messengers who show him wonders that ordinary humans could not see. He sees the storehouses of the winds. He observes the paths of the sun and moon. He witnesses places where the souls of the righteous rest while awaiting the final restoration of the world. For ancient readers, these visions were meant to inspire awe and reflection. They emphasized that the universe was not chaotic or random, but carefully ordered according to divine wisdom. At the same time, the visions remind readers that moral choices matter. The actions of individuals in societies shape the future of the world. Another powerful moment in the Book of Enoch occurs when Enoch is asked to deliver a message to the Watchers themselves. Because of their actions, the Watchers are no longer able to approach the divine presence directly. Instead, they ask Enoch to speak on their behalf. This scene is filled with tension. The Watchers, once powerful guardians of heaven, now stand in a position of regret and uncertainty. They hope that Enoch might intercede for them and ask for forgiveness. Enoch agrees to carry their message, but when he brings their request before the divine throne, the answer he receives is sobering. The message given to Enoch declares that the consequences of their actions cannot simply be undone. Instead, the order of creation will be restored through a series of events that will reshape the world. For ancient audiences, this part of the story connected directly with another well-known biblical event, the coming of the Great Flood during the time of Noah. In the narrative of Enoch, the flood becomes part of a larger story about the cleansing and renewal of the earth. Humanity, despite its struggles, will have a chance to begin again. Through this sequence of visions and messages, the Book of Enoch presents a dramatic picture of cosmic history. It describes a universe where spiritual and human actions are closely connected, where justice ultimately prevails, and where faithful individuals play an important role in revealing divine truth. But the story is far from over, because after Enoch delivers these messages and witnesses these visions, something extraordinary happens once again. Just as the brief biblical account hinted centuries earlier, Enoch's journey does not end like that of other human beings. Instead, he is taken into the heavenly realm. What he sees there and what he reveals about the future forms the next stage of this remarkable narrative. In the next part of our exploration, we will discover the turning point of Enoch's story, where his visions expand beyond the present world and begin to reveal the ultimate destiny of humanity. If you are ready to continue, as the visions of Enoch continue, the story reaches a powerful turning point. Up until this moment, Enoch has witnessed the disorders spreading across the earth and the consequences of the Watcher's actions. But now his journey moves beyond simply observing the world. He begins to see a much greater picture, one that stretches far into the future. According to the Book of Enoch, Enoch is taken on a remarkable journey through the heavens. Guided by divine messengers, he is shown places and realities that ordinary human eyes could never see. For the writers of this ancient text, these visions were meant to reveal that the world is part of a much larger cosmic order. One of the first things Enoch witnesses is the structure of the heavens themselves. The book describes vast regions where the movements of the sun, moon, and stars are carefully arranged. These celestial bodies are not wandering randomly through space. Instead, they follow precise paths and cycles established by divine wisdom. The message behind these descriptions is clear. Just as the stars move according to a fixed order, the moral universe also operates according to an unseen structure. Actions have consequences, and justice, though sometimes delayed, remains part of the fabric of creation. But Enoch's journey does not stop with the stars. As he continues traveling through these heavenly realms, he encounters places that symbolize the fate of humanity. Some areas are described as peaceful and filled with light, where the righteous wait and hope for the restoration of the world. Other places appear darker and more solemn, representing the consequences of corruption and rebellion. These visions reflect an ancient belief that history is moving toward a moment of divine justice. The Book of Enoch describes a future when wrongdoing will no longer dominate the earth. Instead, righteousness will be restored and the balance of creation will be renewed. One of the most intriguing sections of the book introduces a mysterious figure often referred to as the Chosen One, or Son of Man. In these passages, this figure represents a future leader who will bring justice and restore harmony to the world. The language used is poetic and symbolic, describing a time when the faithful will be vindicated and the forces of corruption will fade away. For ancient readers, these visions offered hope during times of uncertainty. Many communities living in the centuries before the time of Jesus faced political oppression, social upheaval, and spiritual confusion. Stories like those found in the Book of Enoch reminded them that history was not meaningless. They believed that God was still guiding the destiny of the world, even when circumstances seemed difficult. As Enoch continues his journey, the visions grow even more symbolic. One famous section, known as the Dream Visions, presents the history of humanity in the form of a symbolic dream. In this dream, people and nations are represented by different animals moving across the landscape of history. Through this symbolic storytelling, the narrative describes the rise and fall of kingdoms, the struggles of God's people, and the promise that justice will eventually prevail. This style of storytelling may seem unusual to modern readers, but in the ancient world, symbolic dreams were considered powerful ways to communicate deep truths. The message of the dream is not meant to provide a simple timeline of events. Instead, it reveals a spiritual perspective on history, one that reminds readers that the struggles of the present are part of a much larger story. But perhaps the most striking moment in Enoch's journey occurs when he approaches the divine throne itself. In this scene, Enoch witnesses the glory of God, surrounded by countless heavenly beings. The imagery is filled with light, fire, and awe-inspiring majesty. Here, Enoch receives a profound understanding of the purpose behind the visions he has been shown. The message is both solemn and hopeful. The corruption that spread through the world will not last forever. The suffering experienced by the righteous will not be forgotten. and the actions of every person, whether good or evil, will ultimately be brought into the light. For the writers of the Book of Enoch, this moment represents the turning point of the entire story. It reveals that history is not simply a series of random events. Instead, it unfolds according to a divine plan that leads toward restoration and renewal. After witnessing these visions, Enoch receives a task. He is told to record what he has seen and to share these revelations with future generations. His words are meant to encourage those who seek righteousness and remind them that their faithfulness matters. The book presents Enoch as a bridge between heaven and earth, a human witness to the mysteries of the cosmos. This role explains why his story captured the imagination of ancient readers. Unlike many other figures in early biblical history, Enoch is portrayed as someone who glimpses the hidden order of creation and carries that knowledge back to humanity. Yet even after all these revelations, one final question remains. What deeper message were these ancient writers trying to communicate through the story of Enoch? Was the book simply describing visions of heavenly realms? Or was it teaching something more profound about faith, responsibility, and the choices that shape the destiny of humanity? To answer that question, we must look beyond the dramatic visions and explore the deeper meaning behind this mysterious text. In the next part of our journey, we will uncover the spiritual lessons and symbolic meanings hidden within the Book of Enoch and why these teachings have continued to spark curiosity for centuries. If you are ready to continue, after witnessing the extraordinary visions described in the Book of Enoch, one important question naturally arises. What was the true purpose of these stories? At first glance, the book may seem filled with mysterious imagery, heavenly journeys, symbolic dreams, and descriptions of unseen realms. But for the ancient readers who first encountered these writings, the message went far deeper than curiosity about cosmic mysteries. The Book of Enoch was ultimately about moral responsibility, faithfulness, and the belief that justice would one day prevail. To understand this deeper meaning, we must remember the time in which these writings were created. The communities who preserved and shared these stories often lived during difficult periods of history. Political powers ruled over them, and many people struggled to understand why injustice sometimes appeared to succeed. In such times, the Book of Enoch offered reassurance. It reminded readers that the visible world was not the only reality. Beyond the events unfolding on earth, there was a greater spiritual order guiding the destiny of creation. One of the key lessons of the book is that choices matter. Throughout the narrative, the actions of both heavenly beings and human societies carry consequences. When the watchers step beyond their proper role and introduce harmful influences into the world, their actions disturb the balance of creation. This part of the story serves as a powerful warning. Knowledge, power, and influence are not inherently wrong, but when they are used without wisdom or humility, they can lead to corruption and suffering. For ancient audiences, this idea reflected a truth that still resonates today. The health of a society depends on the moral choices of those who shape it. Another important message of the Book of Enoch is the idea that faithfulness often requires patience. In the visions shown to Enoch, the restoration of justice does not happen instantly. Instead, history unfolds over time. The righteous may face hardship, while wrongdoing sometimes seems to prosper for a while. But the book emphasizes that this situation is temporary. The divine order of creation remains intact, even when it is not immediately visible. Eventually, justice will be restored, and the truth of every action will be revealed. This message would have been deeply meaningful to communities who felt overwhelmed by uncertainty. It encouraged them to remain steadfast in their values, trusting that their faithfulness would not be forgotten. The character of Enoch himself also carries symbolic significance. In the brief biblical reference found in Genesis, Enoch is described as a man who walked with God. This phrase suggests a life marked by deep trust, obedience, and spiritual awareness. The Book of Enoch expands on this idea by portraying him as someone who listens carefully to divine wisdom and remains committed to righteousness, even when the world around him struggles. In this sense, Enoch becomes a model of what faithful living looks like. He does not seek power or fame. Instead, his role is to observe, to learn, and to share the truths he has witnessed. For readers of the ancient world, this message was clear. True wisdom comes not from dominating others, but from living in harmony with God's purpose. Another theme running through the Book of Enoch is the belief that creation itself reflects divine order. The detailed descriptions of the sun, moon, and stars moving in perfect patterns are more than astronomical observations. They symbolize the idea that the universe operates according to a wise and intentional design. Just as the heavens follow their appointed paths, human life is meant to follow a moral path rooted in justice and compassion. When societies drift away from this path, disorder and suffering emerge. But when people choose righteousness, they align themselves with the deeper harmony of creation. For many readers, this perspective transforms the Book of Enoch from a mysterious ancient text into a powerful reflection on the human condition. It reminds us that the struggles of our world, conflict, injustice, and uncertainty are not new. Generations before us faced similar questions about the nature of good and evil. Through symbolic visions and poetic language, the writers of Enoch sought to answer those questions by pointing toward a future where justice and mercy ultimately prevail. There is also an important lesson about humility embedded within the narrative. The Watchers, despite their power, lose their place because they step outside the boundaries of wisdom and responsibility. Their story serves as a reminder that greatness without humility can lead to downfall. In contrast, Enoch's humility becomes the reason he is entrusted with divine revelations. His story encourages readers to pursue knowledge and understanding while remaining grounded in reverence for the Creator. Finally, the Book of Enoch invites readers to look beyond the surface of everyday life. It encourages reflection on the unseen forces shaping history, the moral weight of human decisions, and the hope that the story of the world is moving toward restoration. For centuries, these ideas have continued to spark curiosity and conversation among historians, theologians, and believers alike. Even though the Book of Enoch is not included in most modern Bibles, its themes echo many of the same principles found throughout Scripture: the call to righteousness, the promise of justice, and the belief that God's wisdom ultimately guides the course of history. But after exploring the story, its visions, and its deeper lessons, one final question remains. Why does the Book of Enoch still capture the imagination of readers today? Why do people continue to explore its pages thousands of years after it was first written? To answer that question, we must step back and look at the lasting legacy of this remarkable text. In the final part of our journey, we will discover why the Book of Enoch still matters today, and what its story can teach modern readers about faith, curiosity, and the search for truth. If you are ready to complete the story, after traveling through the visions, mysteries, and symbolism of the Book of Enoch, we arrive at the final question that has fascinated readers for centuries. Why does this ancient text still capture the imagination of people today? The answer lies not only in the mysterious stories it contains, but in the deeper questions it raises about faith, history, and humanity's relationship with the unseen world. The Book of Enoch stands as a reminder that throughout history, people have always searched for meaning beyond what they could see. Long before modern science or global communication, ancient writers were already asking profound questions. Why does injustice exist in the world? Why do good people sometimes suffer while wrongdoing seems to succeed? And how will the story of humanity ultimately end? The Book of Enoch attempted to explore these questions through powerful imagery and visionary storytelling. Its pages describe a universe filled with purpose, where the events of Earth are connected to a greater spiritual reality. For ancient readers, this message was deeply comforting. It reminded them that even when life felt uncertain, the world was not abandoned or meaningless. Instead, it was part of a larger story, guided by divine wisdom. Another reason the Book of Enoch continues to attract attention today is its connection to the earliest traditions of faith. Although it is not included in most modern Bibles, the book offers insight into how ancient communities understood the relationship between heaven and earth. It shows us that the spiritual imagination of early believers was rich, thoughtful, and deeply engaged with questions about justice, morality, and the destiny of the world. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed that the Book of Enoch was known and respected by some communities thousands of years ago. This discovery helped historians better understand the diversity of thought that existed within early Jewish and Christian traditions. Rather than being a forgotten curiosity, the Book of Enoch became a valuable window into the spiritual conversations that shaped biblical history. But perhaps the most enduring part of the story is the figure of Enoch himself. In the Bible, his life is described in only a few short verses, yet those verses leave a lasting impression. Enoch is remembered as a man who walked with God. This simple phrase carries profound meaning. It suggests a life lived in trust, humility, and spiritual awareness. Enoch's story reminds readers that faith is not merely about knowledge or ritual. It is about a relationship with the Creator that shapes how we live each day. The expanded story found in the Book of Enoch transforms this brief biblical reference into a powerful symbol. In the narrative, Enoch becomes a witness to the mysteries of creation. He observes the consequences of corruption and the promise of justice. And he shares the message that righteousness, patience, and faithfulness ultimately matter. Even if modern readers approach the book as an ancient work of spiritual literature rather than a historical record, its themes remain meaningful. It challenges us to think about the moral direction of our world. It encourages reflection on the choices that shape our communities, and it reminds us that the pursuit of wisdom and justice has always been part of humanity's journey. The story of Enoch also teaches us something important about curiosity. Throughout history, people have explored texts like the Book of Enoch, not simply to uncover secrets, but to deepen their understanding of faith and tradition. Curiosity, when guided by humility and wisdom, can lead us toward deeper insight rather than confusion. At the same time, the Book of Enoch reminds us that not every ancient text was meant to become part of the biblical canon. The formation of the Bible involved centuries of reflection, prayer, and careful discernment by communities of faith. Some writings were recognized as scripture, while others remained valuable historical or spiritual works that helped illuminate the beliefs of the past. Understanding this process allows us to appreciate the Book of Enoch without confusion. It becomes part of the broader story of how people across generations have sought to understand the mysteries of creation and the character of God. And perhaps that is why the Book of Enoch still sparks conversations today. Not because it reveals forbidden secrets or hidden knowledge, but because it invites readers to reflect on the deeper questions of life. Questions about justice. Questions about faith. Questions about how humanity fits within the vast story of creation. The ancient writers who preserved these visions believed that the world was moving toward restoration, a future where righteousness would overcome corruption and harmony would be restored to creation. Whether one reads the Book of Enoch as history, symbolism, or spiritual reflection, its message points toward the same enduring hope, that the search for truth, wisdom, and righteousness is never wasted, and that throughout history, individuals like Enoch remind us that walking faithfully step by step can shape the story of the world in ways we may never fully see. The mystery of the Book of Enoch may never be completely solved, but its journey through history continues to inspire curiosity, reflection, and a deeper appreciation for the ancient traditions that helped shape our understanding of faith. And perhaps the most powerful lesson of all is the simplest one. Like Enoch, every generation is invited to walk faithfully, to seek wisdom, and to trust that the story of humanity is part of a much greater design. If this exploration helped you discover something new about biblical history and ancient traditions, consider sharing your thoughts. What do you think about the story of Enoch and the mysteries surrounding this ancient book? Your perspective may help continue the conversation that began thousands of years ago.